The crisp autumn air nipped at my exposed skin as I trudged through the dense forest, fallen leaves crunching beneath my boots. I'd always loved hiking, but something felt different today. The usually welcoming woods seemed to close in around me, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. I checked my watch, 4:30 p.m. I had plenty of time to make it back before dark, or so I thought. As I ventured deeper into the forest, an unsettling silence descended. No birds chirping, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an eerie, oppressive quiet. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response, save for the faintest echo of my own words. The path I'd been following began to fade, becoming less distinct with each step. Panic started to creep in as I realized I might be lost. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to use the GPS, but there was no signal. Of course. As the light began to fade, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice trembling. Again, silence. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about following any particular trail. I just needed to get out of these woods. The trees seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look directly at them, they were motionless. A cold mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around my ankles. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of me. This wasn't right. It was too early in the season for this kind of cold. As darkness fell, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were boarded up, and the door hung crookedly on rusted hinges. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to find my way out of the forest, but exhaustion and the promise of shelter won out. I approached the cabin cautiously, the floorboards of the small porch creaking ominously under my weight. "Hello?" I called out once more, knocking on the door. It swung open with a low groan. The interior was pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a single room. Dust-covered furniture was scattered about, and cobwebs hung from every corner. But it was the far wall that caught my attention. It was covered in strange symbols and writing I didn't recognize. As I moved closer to examine the wall, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it, a figure, darker than the surrounding shadows, standing in the corner. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The figure didn't move or speak, but I could feel its gaze upon me. Suddenly, whispers filled the air, coming from all around me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was menacing, urgent. The temperature in the cabin plummeted, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I backed away from the shadowy figure, bumping into the wall covered in symbols. As soon as I touched it, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The symbols began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. "What do you want?" I shouted, terror gripping me. The figure took a step forward, and I could now make out its features, or lack thereof. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling void. I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers reached a crescendo, and the glowing symbols on the wall began to shift and move, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The shadowy figure was now mere feet away from me. I could feel a cold, unnatural energy emanating from it. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging the cabin into near total darkness, save for the eerie green glow of the symbols. "Please," I whimpered, sliding down the wall to the floor. "What is this place? What are you?" The figure loomed over me, and a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once finally spoke. "We are the Guardians," it said, its words seeming to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my mind. "And you have trespassed in our domain." "I'm sorry," I pleaded. "I didn't mean to. I just got lost. Please, let me go." The voice continued, ignoring my pleas. "For centuries, we have protected these woods from those who would desecrate them. But the barrier grows weak. The old ways are being forgotten." As it spoke, the cabin began to fade away around me. The walls became transparent, revealing the forest beyond. But it wasn't the same forest I had entered. The trees were twisted and wrong, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. Faces seemed to peer out from the bark, contorted in silent screams. "You must understand," the voice said. "You must see." Suddenly, I was no longer in the cabin but standing in a moonlit clearing. Before me was an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and etched with the same strange symbols I had seen on the cabin wall. Shadowy figures moved at the edges of my vision, always just out of sight when I turned to look at them directly. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To bear witness," the voice replied. "To carry our message to the world beyond." The shadows at the edge of the clearing began to coalesce, taking on more solid forms. I saw figures in old-fashioned clothing, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They moved towards the altar, and I realized with horror that they were carrying something, someone. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, I don't want to see this." But I couldn't look away. The figures placed their burden on the altar, a young woman, unconscious or possibly dead. One of them produced a knife that gleamed in the moonlight. "This is how it was," the voice said. "This is how it must be again. The old ways must not be forgotten." I wanted to run, to close my eyes, to wake up from this nightmare. But I was rooted to the spot, forced to watch as the knife descended. Just as it was about to make contact, everything went black. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in the forest, standing on the path I had originally been following. The sun was setting, casting a blood-red glow through the trees. I looked around wildly, trying to get my bearings. Had it all been a hallucination? A vivid daydream? But I could still feel the cold touch of the shadowy figure, still hear the whispers at the edge of my consciousness. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out with shaking hands to see I had full signal again. But that wasn't what sent a chill down my spine. The time displayed on my phone read 4:35 p.m. Only 5 minutes had passed since I had last checked it in the forest. As I stood there, trying to process what had happened, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, half expecting to see the shadowy figure or one of the gaunt-faced apparitions from the clearing. Instead, I saw a hiker approaching on the path. "Hey there," he called out with a friendly wave. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell him everything that had happened, to warn him about the horrors lurking in these woods. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm fine, just a little turned around." "Which way to the trailhead?" He pointed back the way he had come, and I nodded my thanks. As I started walking, I could have sworn I heard the faintest whisper on the wind, "Remember." I quickened my pace, eager to put as much distance between myself and whatever I had encountered in those woods. But even as the trees thinned out and I could see the parking lot ahead, I knew this wasn't over. The voice had said I was to bear witness, to carry a message. What had I seen? What did it mean? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? As I reached my car, I cast one last look back at the forest. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the tree line, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I got into my car and started the engine, my hands still shaking. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of those woods. Something ancient and hungry, waiting for its chance to reveal itself to the world once more. The forests hold many secrets, and I had been given a glimpse of just one of them. But as I drove home, the whisper still echoing in my mind, I knew that this was only the beginning. The old ways were stirring, and I had been chosen to play a part in whatever was to come. What horrors await in the depths of the forest? What ancient rituals are being awakened? And how many more unwitting hikers will stumble upon the truth before it's too late? As night fell and the shadows lengthened, I couldn't help but wonder, who will be the next to hear the haunted whispers from the darkest woods? Days passed, but I couldn't shake the memories of what I'd experienced in those woods. The whispers haunted my dreams, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the shadowy figure's words echoing in my mind, "Remember." I tried to go about my normal life, but everything felt different. The world seemed darker, more sinister. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those hollow-eyed apparitions watching me. A week after my encounter, I received a strange package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in spidery handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it to find an old, leather-bound book inside. Its pages were yellowed with age, and it smelled of musty earth and decay. As I flipped through the book, my blood ran cold. It was filled with the same symbols I had seen in the cabin and on the stone altar. Intricate diagrams and descriptions of rituals filled the pages, along with accounts of encounters with beings that defied explanation. That night, as I pored over the book, trying to make sense of its contents, a storm raged outside. The wind howled, and rain lashed against my windows. In a flash of lightning, I saw a figure standing in my backyard, staring up at my window. It was one of the gaunt-faced apparitions from the forest. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. Whatever I had encountered in those woods had followed me home. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove back to the forest. I don't know what compelled me to return, but I felt drawn there, like a moth to a flame. The parking lot was empty when I arrived, and the woods seemed to loom before me, darker and more forbidding than ever. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail. Almost immediately, the air grew colder, and that eerie silence descended once again. I pushed on, following some instinct I couldn't explain. After what felt like hours of walking, I found myself back in the clearing with the stone altar. It looked different in the daylight, less menacing but no less ancient. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to writhe and move as I approached. "I'm here," I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vastness of the forest. I remembered. I came back. "What do you want from me?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the air began to shimmer, and the shadowy figure materialized before me. You have taken the first step, it said, its voice reverberating through my entire being. But there is more you must see, more you must understand. Suddenly, the world around me began to shift and change. The trees twisted and grew, their branches forming a canopy that blotted out the sky. The ground beneath my feet became soft and spongy, and I realized with horror that I was standing on a carpet of writhing, half-formed creatures. This is the in-between, the figure said. The place where our world and yours intersect. Few mortals have ever laid eyes upon it. As I watched, unable to look away, shapes began to emerge from the twisted landscape. They were like nothing I had ever seen before, beings of shadow and light, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. These are the old ones, the figure continued. The true guardians of the forest. They have slumbered for millennia, but now they stir. One of the beings turned its gaze upon me, and I felt my mind begin to unravel. Visions of impossible geometries and vast, cosmic horrors flooded my consciousness. I fell to my knees, clutching my head and screaming. Please, I begged. Make it stop. I can't comprehend this. The shadowy figure placed a hand on my shoulder, and the visions receded. You must, it said. For you are the witness. The one chosen to bridge the gap between worlds. As my vision cleared, I found myself back in the normal forest, kneeling before the stone altar. But something had changed. I could feel a connection to the land around me, a heightened awareness of every tree, every blade of grass. The ritual must be completed, the figure said. The old ones must be awakened fully, or the balance between worlds will be lost forever. I stood on shaky legs, my mind reeling from everything I had seen and learned. What do I need to do? The figure gestured to the altar. Your blood, freely given. It will seal the pact and open the way. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I knew, deep down, that I no longer had a choice. I had been chosen for this, whether I wanted it or not. With trembling hands, I picked up a sharp stone from the altar. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and sliced my palm. Blood welled up, dripping onto the ancient stone. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The ground began to shake, and the air filled with an unearthly howl. The trees around the clearing began to twist and writhe, their bark splitting to reveal pulsing, organic matter beneath. From the depths of the earth, massive shapes began to emerge. They defied description, a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh, shadow, and cosmic energy. The old ones had awakened. As they rose, towering over the forest, I felt my mind starting to fracture again. But this time, instead of trying to shut it out, I embraced it. I opened myself to the knowledge and power flooding into me. In that moment, I understood. The rituals, the sacrifices of the past, they had all been leading to this moment. The awakening of the old ones wasn't an end, but a beginning. A reset of the natural order, a return to the primordial balance that had been lost. The shadowy figure turned to me, its featureless face somehow radiating approval. You have done well, witness. The pact is sealed. The old ones walk the earth once more. As the massive beings fully emerged, their presence sent shockwaves through reality itself. The very fabric of the world seemed to ripple and distort around them. And yet, I felt no fear. I was part of something greater now, something beyond mortal comprehension. The figure spoke again, its voice now tinged with something almost like warmth. "Your journey is not over, witness. It has only just begun. You must go out into the world and prepare the way. For the old ones will reshape the earth, and humanity must be ready." I nodded, understanding the weight of my new purpose. As I turned to leave the clearing, I cast one last look at the old ones. Their cosmic forms defied my mortal eyes, but I could feel their ancient, terrible wisdom. As I made my way back through the forest, I noticed that everything looked different now. The trees seemed more alive, pulsing with an energy I had never noticed before. Small creatures scurried away as I passed, sensing the change in me. When I reached the edge of the forest, I paused and looked back. The old ones were no longer visible, but I could feel their presence, a thrumming energy that permeated everything. I stepped out of the woods and into the world, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The old ways had returned, and I was their herald. The horrors I had witnessed in those dark woods were just the beginning. As I drove away from the forest, my mind racing with the knowledge of what was to come, I couldn't help but smile. The world thought it knew fear, but it had no idea what was awakening in the shadows. The true horror was just beginning, and I would be there to witness it all. The whispers in the dark had become a roar, and soon everyone would hear it. The old ones had risen, and the world would tremble before them. But as I merged onto the highway, heading towards the unsuspecting cities beyond, a flicker of doubt crept into my mind. Had I done the right thing? Or had I just unleashed something that humanity was not prepared to face? The weight of my decision pressed down on me, and I realized that the true horror might not be the old ones themselves, but the consequences of their awakening. What changes would they bring to our world? How many would suffer in the reshaping of reality? As night fell and the cities loomed on the horizon, their lights twinkling like stars, I felt a chill run down my spine. The old ones were coming, and I was their harbinger. But at what cost? The road stretched out before me, dark and foreboding. And as I drove towards an uncertain future, I couldn't shake the feeling that the most terrifying part of this journey was yet to come. The woods had revealed their secrets, but the true horror was only just beginning.